Ms. Jayapal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Robust public infrastructure is a prerequisite for prosperity, but it's more than an obligation. It's actually an opportunity to make lasting and transformational change to our economy and shift it from an extractive one to a resilient one, an inequitable one to one that benefits everyone, white, black, and brown. And I'm so proud, Mr. Chairman, that under this president and a Democratic Congress, we have created 6.4 million new jobs in just the first year of the Biden administration. We have brought unemployment down to 3.9%, and that is a full 2 years before economists thought we would get down to that level. And of course, we have made a good start to rebuilding our country by passing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but we gotta do more. We gotta do more to figure out how to engage smaller communities and businesses and local governments, as well as communities of color that are left out of the planning and therefore then left out of the process of competing for bigger grants that bigger localities and firms can get. So I wanted to focus on this disparity. A recent study found that in communities affected by natural disasters, Black Americans lost nearly $20,000 in wealth, where their white counterparts gained over $126,000 in wealth from investments in rebuilding those communities. So, Mr. Wade, in your opinion, what is behind these disparities, and how can the federal government ensure that communities of color are actually included in the process of infrastructure planning and implementation?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think the reality is a number of things. I kind of refer to the social determinants of wealth, the way we look at the social determinants of health. It's inclusive of everything from education gaps to gaps that in opportunities for Black and minority-owned businesses. It is infrastructure, which is why we're here today in reality to talk about how infrastructure and closing the infrastructure gaps and connecting these communities to job centers and commerce and trade is so important in closing the wealth gaps. And I think so all of that collectively, I think contribute to the challenge that we're experiencing today, but also present a unique opportunity. And infrastructure is just absolutely critical, a critical part of that process.
Thank you. I recently introduced a bill called the Climate Resilience Workforce Bill, and it actually recognizes that the people that do the work after climate disasters are actually largely folks of color, and if we can rebuild that workforce, and if we can make sure that we're putting an emphasis on including minority firms and communities in the planning, we're gonna be much more effective. Mr. Martin, your research exposes the long history of excluding communities of color in infrastructure and housing investments and how it perpetuates inequality. How can the federal government avoid repeating those same mistakes?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And certainly there are many opportunities to think through in every funding structure that the federal government invests in and within state and local governments. And my written testimony, I talk about 6 different dimensions of equity and how the federal government can use policy to inform those. One is simply starting to identify those places that have suffered in the past as targeted places for investment. We've done this many bipartisan ways of identifying low-income communities that deserve additional resources to repair past injustices. So that's number one. Second is authentic community engagement, including involving local civic community groups that are often asked to attend community hearings with no pay, no compensation, no opportunity to really bring in their members, including poor, low-income community members who don't have the resources and the bandwidth to attend 5 community hearings in the evenings when they have to take care of their kids or holding down the 3rd job. And there are a variety of other ways in which this happens, including making sure that the training programs that are offered for infrastructure, the hiring, my colleague from the chamber who mentioned contracting processes are all very inclusive and very well thought out. And that includes job transitions for local community members. In fact, just this very morning, I got a notice from the American Society of Civil Engineers, which I'm a member, that sends out their daily notices saying that there's a job training program in New Jersey training young adults from low-income communities on water infrastructure, preparing for the massive jobs that they're hoping to see come out. And those are the kinds of things that we have to think about, very thoughtful ways in which state and local governments can ensure that federal monies are equitable
That's so important, and if we, when we pass the pieces of, that we have in the Build Back Better Act, that will give us the opportunity to train workforces, to prepare for climate resilience, and to make sure we are building up the infrastructure of every part of our country, including the childcare infrastructure, the service infrastructure, and creating those good jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.